Christine Dickson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lynn. I am very, very excited to be here.
I am really excited that we're getting to have this conversation. And, the thing is, I rarely get to talk to other coaches. And the more interesting thing is, a lot of the coaches in my world would not put the word transformation in the kind of coaching that they do. Partially because, like in my world and working with executives, often Fortune 500 people who are very left brain, very investment banking type people or whatever, you use words that say transformation and they're immediately like, they're going, oh, you're going woo or whatever. And yet really what they're seeking is transformation. Mm-hmm. You actually call yourself a transformational mentor. So it's right there in your title, if you will. But here's my question. How do you define transformation, especially in a coaching context?
Well, I would start this off by quoting Ben Franklin, which I believe it was him that said, comparison is the death of all joy. So transformation is going to be specific to each and every person of what that means for them, and not in comparison to what other people are doing, but in what is evolving and trying to have them rise to their greatest level in that moment. And having those personal wins in that way.
So I'm still stuck on comparison is the death of all joy. I was like, whoa, I really like that quote. I've heard it before, but not in this context. So yeah, my brain's going like, whoa, tell me more. So
it's kind of like, remember when you were young? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I want to hear.
I was just gonna say, remember when you were young and like maybe you got your first car and it was a beater, but you were so excited that you had a car and you thought it was the best car in the world. And then, your other friend group, someone got a brand new car and you went from thinking your car was so amazing because now you don't have to walk everywhere or take the bus, to being like kind of ashamed of your car because now you're comparing it to but that car was the world to you. It changed your entire life.
It was a 1969 Pontiac station wagon. Thank you very much.
Oh, there you go. It was
my mother's hand-me-down. And yeah, and then actually in high school, where having a station wagon was not cool until the guys were like, well, you can lay down in the back of a station wagon. That might be kind of cool.
Yeah. I had a 1973 Monte Carlo that was canary yellow with white vinyl interior and the Landau roof. So,
Yeah. And see, my comparison back then was I wanted speed. And so I actually, her car had a big engine in it. So I would drag race with the guys down the main street.
Nice.
And that was the way, though, speaking of comparison, that it'd be like, I'd try to find a way to be better than other people. And that's really where I went when you said comparison is the death of all joy, is that race that we find ourselves in, comparing ourselves to each other.
Because it kind of takes us out of our own experience and into the worst place that we can be, which is in other people's heads, trying to see us through their eyes.
Yes.
Trying to see if we measure up or not.
And you know where that starts, honestly, I think, is in the home, especially if you have siblings. Because, I often say all I'm really doing when I'm coaching people is teaching them not to have sibling rivalry in the corporate workplace. It comes out looking different, but it's like, how do I get to be the boss's favorite? Or how do I find a way to measure up better than all these other people around me, which means there's no teamwork.
I think it also can add in, I was also a kind of a only child. The dynamic of my family is very complicated, but if you are not seen, right?
Mhm.
If you're, the whole old adage of, children should be seen and not heard. If you grew up in a family that had that, then, I used to call it doing my monkey dance. What can I do to get attention, to make people laugh, or so there can be that aspect of it as well, right? Like if I don't have the attention on me, if I'm not getting constant positive feedback and reinforcement, then I'm adrift. I don't know if I'm okay.
Right. We really don't. And when I was teaching the self-awareness class I taught for 10 years down in Florida, one of the women I taught with was a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm not a licensed psychologist, so I didn't have a lot of the research and science that she had around self-awareness. But she had one day pulled up her computer and showed our class that we were co-teaching this class something called the still face experiment. Have you seen this?
Is that with a
Where the
baby?
mom with the
Yes.
baby.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll describe it for the listeners so they'll understand. But the assignment for the mom, which I wouldn't have a hard time being the mom doing this because it's so devastating to the child, is, as we all do when you're face to face with a baby, it's cuckoo gaga, happy face. And you can just see sort of the love going back and forth and the child interacting with mom and getting that feedback. And then the mom's assignment is to make her face very still and give nothing. And you watch the baby literally melt down. Her presence is still there. Her face is still on the baby. And the baby's not getting any kind of feedback back. And the baby goes from uncomfortable and kind of moving around in its chair to full on like screaming, crying. Mm-hmm. And that to me, just in one short video, describes what our core human needs of being seen are.
Right, because you watch the baby go through a series of bids for connection, of trying to laugh with mom or trying to coo and there's no response. And one of the things that they were trying to show too was the co-regulation that the baby uses the mother or father's nervous system and facial expressions and all of that to tell itself how to feel, that if it's okay. And that when it doesn't get that, what you would watch is after it started to cry and scream and try to get that way, it would become very silent and very shut down, because now it has to go inward where it doesn't have the skills to be able to do and try and soothe itself. And yeah, it's very, very interesting and a very hard thing to watch.
And it's really hard when you connect it to having had that happen to you unintentionally or intentionally, but usually unintentionally, because that say more about bids for connection, because I really love that language about how we try to interact with each other. And I don't think very often we even realize we're doing a bid for connection, but we know it doesn't feel good when we don't get the outcome we want.
Yes.
So describe bids for connection so people can kind of get on the same page with us?
It's funny. My daughter and I, like you, my daughter's in the same career choice as me. So, we talk about a lot of things together, and we were talking about the idea of gossip and how excited and connected you can feel when you are talking about someone else or talking about, whether it's someone or someone in public spotlight, and how energized everybody is. And then you walk away and you feel like crap.
Yeah.
But you have this like, you have this like hangover from it. And I really think that gossip is a negative bid for connection. Because if you start talking about things that are positive, you don't get as much interaction with people. But if you go negative, everybody will come in with their opinion or their stuff. And it doesn't even have to be that, it doesn't have to be that bad, you know, like you don't have to be like talking really badly about something. But if it's got that negative vibe, people learn to connect through that, even though we don't like it. So
What is that? Why are we so conditioned to do that?
you know, if I had the answer to that, but I have ideas. I don't know if I have the answer. I have ideas. I just think it's low-hanging fruit. You know, I just think it's easy. It's a way of defining your identity of what you are not. Maybe it's not as easy. It's, you know, you're not being able to define who you are, but you are able to define who you are not by talking about someone that or something that did something that you're against or that you don't like, right? Or that you don't agree with, and then getting other people to do the same. Now we're all defining who we're not, and we're feeling good about ourselves because we're not that.
Well, that is definitely one of those pieces, because I think we all sort of at our very core are trying to figure out, are we okay? Are we good enough?
Yes.
And that back to that comparison is the death of joy. It's not that much of a stretch to say, well, I've just got to find something I'm better than you. I think it's the core of a lot of things like racism. You know, is how can I don't feel that great about myself, but I don't even say that out loud to myself. I just need to find a way I'm better than somebody else.
Exactly. And because the identity, the ego is always trying to create itself. It's always trying to define itself by everything, you know, from nationality to gender, to socioeconomic background, to where did you go to school, to what is your political leanings, to what is your church, to what is, everything is building an identity.
Yeah.
And then the problem is that we don't always like the identity we build, but unless you start to become aware of it, because some of it gets built for us, you know, we get born into it. So
I think a lot of it gets built for us. And I think social media is very much fueling that. I think those data scientists that very much understand human psychology have figured out how to hit those ego buttons in a way that shape us without us even being aware we're being shaped.
Yes. Yeah. And it's almost like, it's like internet tribalism, you know, and the saddest part about that, I believe, and is just the idea that everyone is now moving so quickly to align with who they want to, oh, I align with this or I don't align with that, that no one is willing to ask more questions or to have conversations with people they may not necessarily agree with, so that we can, you know, kind of help shape a conversation that can lead, because, you know, I know I might be diverging on some, but like the idea of being, well, because when we talk about horses and stuff, right, we talk about pressure and we talk about how, you know, you can make a horse do something, right, with using a lot of pressure and, you know, almost violence in a way, like you can make him do something, but you didn't change his mind about you. You didn't create a space where you can collaborate together and have respect for each other. And I think that in some ways, there's such a great movement happening in the world for, you know, groups of people who have been marginalized in the past. But one of the cautions I see that maybe is starting to come out now is the idea that if you do it with the same heavy hand that it was done in the first place, you can force people to change their language, and you can force people by laws to hire certain people or to do certain things, but you are actually feeding the thing that you don't want to see, because you are creating, you're not changing hearts and minds, because you're unwilling to have difficult conversations, and people can be so quick to point to people and give them labels of, well, you're a man, so you don't understand, or you're this, or, and that just you're shutting people down, and you're shaming them too, in a way,
we absolutely do that. In the cool culture, it's like there's just as much shaming from the open people that are tolerant as there are for those who seem closed-minded. It's like, it's the same. It's that energy, which, in my training, you're reading my book, Dancing the Tightrope. And in this podcast, I've talked several times to Bruce Anderson. It's what he calls tyrant mindset.
Mm-hmm.
You're using the same tyrant mindset, which is that ego-shaped, altered mind of society, as opposed to our natural mind, which is the way we really are inside.
Right.
And that's what I woke up this morning. The words that were rattling around in my head was natural mind, meaning I know how to live and dance in nature based on natural consequences, as opposed to altered mind, which means people are changing my mind in ways that serve them.
Right. And we are all evolving. Like, there has to be, I feel like we need to soften and start to create space and allow people to change. And that means, because we're very quick to point out other people's mistakes, but it's easy to do from the other side of a keyboard, or from, but we've all got skeletons in our closet. We all made mistakes. And if our mistakes were put out for the masses to judge, we would be in the same box, right? So can we change can we move the direction the ship is traveling in, but do it in a way that creates space that allows people for their own evolution? And that's so important.
Well, we've made changing your mind a problem for some people, right? Like, we hold politicians to account. You said this 5 years ago,
20 years ago,
or 20 years ago, and now you're saying this. You can't. You must be lying. No, I changed my mind.
Right.
And if we actually want change, we have to make space for people to be wrong before, and evolve, and not necessarily even be right today, because I don't think right and wrong is the right measure. I think
right.
I think right and wrong, I wrote Edward de Bono wrote a book years ago. He wrote two of them. One is called I'm Right and You're Wrong. And I love that book. And the other one was Water Logic. And they're both based on this same principle, which is sort of, what is this going to lead to? i.e., what's the natural flow? Like water flows over rocks, as opposed to what he called rock logic, which is something's right or wrong.
Right.
But it has no room for growth or evolution if it's right or wrong.
Right. I was just
like, what? Go ahead.
I was just talking to someone. I can't remember who it was. And we were talking about just the changes for women since I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, when we would play, right? We would play, and there were three things that we would play, right? Flight attendant, secretary, and nurse. Because in the 70s, growing up in the 70s, when you were growing up, as a young girl, that was all that you really saw yourself portrayed at out in the world. Like, those were the jobs for you. And people, it was normal to have your dog chained to a doghouse in the backyard, or with a doghouse in the backyard. These are things
that was normal.
Dream about doing that. Like, that's horrifying, right? That you would just leave your dog out there, but we've evolved since then. But if you turn that lens back to the 70s and take our evolved mind and then look back on it and then start looking for, people to point out and judge. You can't know what the climate was like, what was normalized back then. We have to be able to evolve. And I think that going forward, I think the pendulum has swung really far in a direction that's starting to get off the rails. But I believe that the pendulum will swing back to where that we can start to have this space and conversations. You will never get rid of hate and bigotry, and it's never going away, right? But we can, I think that with intention and with humility and being open to listen, but also I am all about empowerment. I cannot feed the idea of the disempowered, in the sense of it's not that I can't acknowledge that exists. Of course I can. I mean, it's very obvious. But what I'm interested in is then how do we empower people, right? How do we empower them? Because I will say that I have a lot of things that I can talk about, that a lot of mistakes that I made, a lot of things I wish I could, but I learned from them. And I feel like that's the whole point to life, is learning, growing, and evolving.
That is it. It's that learning piece. And I really love Carol Dweck's work. She talked about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I've my shorthand for it's proving mindset versus improving mindset. And, I grew up in a culture, probably both in school, but for sure in the banking world I was in, that the proving mindset was sort of the way you got ahead. I'm going to prove myself. It doesn't mean I'm able to learn anything. I've just got to show you what I know, as opposed to asking questions and growing in my knowledge and so forth. And I do think the whole point now is learning and growing. But I remember, I think I very much started with a fixed mindset for a good part of my career. I was too busy trying to prove myself to improve myself at all, to learn and grow. And I can't necessarily know exactly, it was not ever one event. It was a series of events that helped me change. So for you, what were the kind of events that happened that help you sort of really recognize you're here to learn and grow?
Okay, Lynn, we're going in.
I just opened up the door.
Okay, this question always, my brain always goes back to a certain point, and then it goes, but you got to go back before that to that point. And then wait, before that so
because there's always what happened before what happened, right?
Right. So, all the way, but I was born in Cleveland, but, okay. So I guess for the sake of clarity, I think that I grew up in a very, disjointed family, in the sense that, my mom struggled with a lot of mental health and addiction issues. And so when I was born, I was the oldest. I was born, and 2 years later, my grandmother took me from my mother legally, for neglect. And I grew up with my grandmother. And just to let you know how odd the family was, then my mother had another child, which is my sister Maggie, who was then adopted by my aunt. So, and then my mother had 3 more children, and that she raised. So there was a lot of disjointedness. And there was also, when you talked about siblings, I had, it created a lot of weird dynamics in my family, because I was being raised by my grandmother. Her other grandchildren looked at me like I was getting more of grandmom than, and there was weird dynamic power grabs, and there was, which I was unaware of intellectually as a kid, but sometimes, got caught up feeling them. And I would say that I did have, how do you describe this? It's never really talked about this aspect very much, but from the time I was little, like I remember I was only like 2 years old, and how I remember this, 2 or 3, like, I don't know, but I remember my mother coming with her new boyfriend and wanting to take me back from my grandmother. And I remember it was a big fight.
Mm.
And I remember sitting there and just, I was just watching this whole thing, but feeling it all as well. And I remember my grandmother saying, well, let's let Chrissy decide. And they all looked at me. And in that moment, I remember I could feel all of I felt everything they were feeling, right? Like I felt, as young as I was, I felt, here's my grandmother who has done so much for me and who is my rock. But then there's my mother who my little self like dreamed of living with my mom and, it being good. And I remember just getting up and running out of the house, and my cousins lived next door, and running into their house, and I hid in the basement because I could not make that choice and hurt anyone. And I couldn't choose for myself because I was so feeling their feelings.
Right. And at that age, how would you have been equipped to make that decision?
And I felt that connection to animals and people. And I didn't, I think everyone has that ability. I think that it depends on what environment you're raised in, of whether that gets cultivated or not. I was, in essence, an only child and spent a lot of time alone and playing with bugs and playing with like animals and in nature. So, but I bring that up because I eventually, you start to get a thicker skin as you get around people more, and especially when you go into your teen years. But that yearning to have my mother be my mother never left. And through a series of events, I ended up living with my mother when I was 15. And to give you context, I went from going to a private school in North Jersey where my aunt was the nurse, and I got a scholarship, and going to this private school with all of these people who were, it was no doubt they were all going to college, and they all played, field hockey, and they got, beautiful cars for their, graduation presents, and they summered in the Hamptons in Nantucket, and it was a wonderful experience and wonderful teachers. And then I went to living with my mother in a basement apartment on welfare, and going to a public school where I knew no one, and with my little sister, and my mother was pregnant with another child, and a lot of family turmoil had happened, and I had been really like ostracized. It was really, really difficult. So I bring this up because I was a prime candidate for falling into a real negative situation. And my mother decided that I would be her drinking buddy. So she would, she would take me to bars. And she took me she was a very big fan of motorcycle gangs. So she would take me to motorcycle gang bars in Philly and Jersey. And I ended up meeting who would end up being my kid's father, who was, I was 16 and he was 34.
Wow.
But I never had a father. And he was crazy smart. I used to call him an evil genius. And this is such a long story, So I'm really going to try and streamline it because I want to be able to answer your question, which was about my own evolution.
Yeah.
With him, I would spend weekends with him, and I would go to school during the week, and then I'd leave with him and spend weekends with him. And he would take these trips, and I would just go with him in the car, these road trips. And then, I would never go into the houses that he would visit or anything, or I would wait at the hotel. And one of the trips, heading back, he had me driving and I didn't have a driver's license. We got pulled over. Long story short, there was 5 pounds of methamphetamine in the trunk.
Oh boy.
And I didn't know that. I was 17 at the time. And what ended up happening is the search and seizure was an illegal search and seizure. But I was a juvenile. And so I did get out on my own recognizance and the idea of, that I would continue going to court. But the laws that work for adults are not applicable to juveniles. You don't have the rights, you don't have the laws, don't apply to you. In fact, the first judge I went in front of tried to throw my case out because he was like, there is no way this girl, he's like, you're lucky to be alive. But the prosecution saw me as leverage against my partner, or I guess you'd say. So that didn't happen. So anyway, what ended up happening is they were going to have a hearing to have me certified as an adult and then try me as an adult. And so I went on the run with my kid's father. His name was Rick. So Rick and I went on the run, where I lived under aliases and everything for 4.5 years, while he would continue to go back to Philly and go to all of his court dates. So he would go back and go to his court dates. And it took 4.5 years. And he ended up winning his case because of the illegal search and seizure. So finally I could go home. Now both of my kids were born. I never had any, there was no baby showers. I couldn't call home. I couldn't have friends. So from the time I was 18 until I was 23, I really had no life. And I was really excited to go back. Well, what I didn't know was that 5 pounds of meth is an amount that is also a federal crime. So the feds had created what they call a sealed indictment. So even though he had won his state case, now the feds were charging him with the same exact thing. And so they used that indictment to investigate us. And so we were living in upstate Pennsylvania, and we had a house there, and I had started seeing my family, everything, like, we're all good, I'm back. And gosh, I guess, I don't know how long, maybe we were there for a year, maybe not quite a year. My son was 15 months old. My daughter was, I guess, 4 at the time. And I got a knock on the door, and there was the state trooper standing there, and he said, we have reports of you dumping trash down the road. Would you step outside of the house? And I was like, what? And he's like, step outside of the house. I'm like, okay. I step outside, and agents came out from the woods, from behind the barn, from behind the house. And I had the DEA, the ATF, the FBI, the state police, major crimes, the Pennsylvania State Attorney General himself. My family found out on the 11 o'clock news that
my
I had
gosh.
been arrested. And this I tell you, was the worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to me in my life.
Mm.
And the reason that is that I very much felt invisible in my life. And I felt like a kid in a grown-up world.
Mm-hmm.
And because my kid's father was very much like a father to me, and I would have followed him to the ends of the earth. And I didn't make choices for myself. I just followed, right? I just
Mm-hmm.
followed. I
Yeah.
latched my caboose onto that train, and that's where I was going. And I trusted that he would keep me safe. And all of that came crashing down. And I spent 15 months in jail.
Wow.
And I got moved 12 times in 15 months. And what that means to most of your listeners who've probably never been to jail is that I was under the marshal's jurisdiction, the federal marshals, and they use county jails to hold people while they await trial. So why it's a way to break you down, to move you so much, is because when you get moved, if you need to see your kids, if you only get like a little comb, you don't have anything, right? The food's terrible. I started smoking when I went there, so when I got arrested, I started smoking. And so you don't have anything. So it takes time. Back then, you had to wait to get your phone call. You had to call home. They had to then get the address of where you were and send you a money order so that it could get on your books, so that then they would have this thing called commissary where you could buy your personal care items. You could buy a cup of noodles and little Debbie's cakes that you would live on, And so every time you got moved, no one knew where you were. Your family didn't know. They didn't transfer your money. So it was very difficult. Wow. But I remember I was in Lehigh County Jail, and I was in a cell with a heroin addict prostitute named Lori, who is probably one of the wisest human beings I have ever met, and who was like one of my guardian angels. And so imagine this. Here's me, mostly lived a very sheltered life until quite recently. And I remember her saying to me one day, I think maybe you should go to the group therapy that they're having here. And I can only imagine what she saw, but I did. I went to the group therapy, and let me tell you, those women handed me my ass. No doubt. Because
what did that look like? What did that look like for them?
Let me tell you, because I'm sitting there thinking of myself as, in a way, feeling sorry for myself, because I was just a kid. I met this guy when I was 16, and look what happened. And I was crying every day about my children, and because they didn't understand why I wasn't coming to pick them up. They were they were safe and everything, and they did not care one bit that I was 16, that their whole thing was, you did this.
They made you take responsibility.
You did this. And it was like everything shifted in me, because I went from being a spectator in my life to being in the driver's seat. And so now I don't have to worry about something like this happening to me, because I won't let it happen to me again. So that was a pivotal moment, and which which I remember having a call with my grandmother, and I remember saying to her, you know, I know this is a horrible thing that's happening right now, but I'm so grateful for the way that this has opened my eyes and made me accountable in my life, because I can totally see how this could go on for this could have been my program I ran for my entire life.
Yeah. The old program, meaning I'm the spectator, this is happening to me, I'm the victim.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I take responsibility for my life, I'm in the driver's seat, I can choose a different path.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're going to keep recording.
Okay, that's fine.
But the
I think I have a
timeout we
horse
gave it.
colicking, so I
Oh
just need to
no,
have
I started hearing ding, ding, dings, and I got concerned. Colic is not a small thing, my dear.
She's not eating. Yes. Yes. Call Belinda. Yeah. Oh, I'll do it. Let me just make the call.
Go ahead and make a phone call.
I'll do it.
And then we'll just cut all this part out.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this weather change. We've just got, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, honey, Harlow is colicking.
Oh, fuck. Okay, I'll be right there.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm gonna stay with her. Belinda on her way. Okay. Harlow is colicking. Just called Belinda. Oh, yeah.
Are you close? Are you where are you near your horses, or are you far away?
Yeah, I can see them right out.
Oh, okay.
Back. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I imagine that they'll be, I mean, what would we do without Banamine, right? Like, Banamine usually helps them, but we will see. The good thing is that the owner of the horse lives less than 10 minutes away, and my vet lives less than 10 minutes away.
The people that need to be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
all right.
Well,
back
I will bring us back in, and so this is an alert for Jen to know that we're about to come back in. So the idea of being on the path is probably why you called your business On the Path.
Yes. I had, you know, when I finally put this all behind me, when, you know, I had to actually plead guilty to everything. So I have like 20 something felonies. So I had to plead guilty to everything to get out, but I was like, I would do anything, you know, and that didn't matter to me in that moment. And what did end up happening is, I remember when I finally had a moment to breathe, you know, talk about fight flight, you know.
Oh my gosh.
Remember the moment that I actually took my awareness became into the moment. And I had moved my kids and I into a row house in Southwest Philadelphia. And I remember laying in bed and thinking, they have those moments where, for whatever reason, there's these moments in your life that are just etched in your brain. And I remember laying there thinking, you know what? I have two choices right now. I can be angry about everything that happened to me. Because, I didn't go into everything, but there was a lot, right? From a lot of different sources that I was
I can paint, I'm thinking there's a movie here. I can paint a picture. There was a lot there.
There's a lot. And I can be angry or I can live, but I can't do both. I can't do both. So either I'm going to grab this second chance at life by both hands and just let go of everything. It doesn't matter. Or because the idea is if I try to carry that with me, I'm never leaving that prison.
No, the prison would go with you everywhere you went.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with the four walls and the shitty food.
No.
It's what you carry inside of you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was another turning point moment. And not long after that, I had been working, there's a company, a huge property management company. And one of my first real jobs was as a leasing consultant. And I worked at one of these companies, and a smaller company that my dear friend, Donna Keegan, she was, one of the executives at this company. So she would actually come to the company I was working for and pilfer their people over to her company and use them as managers and stuff, because we were very corporate. We got a lot of training. And so we both described, I didn't even know she saw it this way until later, but we both described the moment of when she walked in. It was like beams of light were streaming in behind her, and she walked, and it was the two of us. It was like recognizing someone that, though you've never really met, you've known forever. And she became one of my biggest mentors.
Isn't that a cool feeling? Oh, I love this. I love this.
God. She was such a pivotal, like I would not be here without her. She was pivotal. She took me under her wing. And I named my company On the Path because of a conversation she and I had when I was in my 20s. And, she looked at me and she was like, here's the thing. In this life, you're either on the path or you're not. And I choose to surround myself with people who are on the path. And the way it was described to me was like, it didn't matter where you were on the path. It wasn't about, I only surround myself with, winners. It wasn't about that. I surround myself with people who have curiosity about who they are, why they are that, and what they want to create. Who they want to become, and how that becoming will affect not just them, but their family history, their ancestral trauma. Can they be the one that breaks it? Can they, how will what they do inspire other people? Or how will it even the ripple effects of their journey? You never know how that ripples out from you.
Yeah. So that's what you meant by on the path. That curiosity piece, that seeking, not about how far ahead, how far behind, or even, when we're on the path, sometimes we get off the path, but if we're seeking, we're still on our path, even if it's not the picture we had for the path.
And the idea that we are all the same. I don't care where you are. We're all the same. Sorry about the beeping. I don't know how to stop that from happening.
Yeah, it's not coming through too loud.
Okay. So,
It won't be the first time that a podcast has had a noise in the background.
okay. The reason I say that is because, one of the gifts I had too was as a hypnotherapist, as a clinical hypnotherapist, I got the opportunity to work at one of the leading drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers in Malibu, California.
Mm.
And I worked with people who were heads of companies that are household names. I worked with people who are in the entertainment business, right? And I worked with people who were born into great wealth.
Yeah.
And what you find out is that we're all the same.
Everybody thinks a title or money or status gives you something. And these are the people I work with as well, not necessarily in a rehab setting, although I can't tell you how many big time names have come to me and told me about something that was going on with one of their kids or something. And I always send them to my daughter, which we'll get to, because that's how we actually initially made contact.
Yes.
Was a story about my daughter. But yeah, and people don't realize, like, I have clients who are worth literally billions of dollars, and people think money is going to solve their problems. It only makes it worse.
And what's really, I found kind of sad was that some of these people that came from great wealth had severe trauma and severe neglect. And a lot of their peers had very little empathy because poor little rich girl, poor little rich boy, right? There was, and that comes back to, again, like, we have to be able to recognize our own humanity. We have to be able to recognize that we're more similar than we are different.
Oh my gosh. So Jennifer and I are writing our story about her addiction. And I was just writing about my first time to go to a 12-step meeting.
Okay.
And so I was, this was almost 20 years ago now. And I was just coming out of my banking world and still sort of in that put together, well-dressed, sort of judgy self that I was, and completely freaked out that I had a daughter that was in addiction. So I'm in my first 12-step meeting and I'm looking around and I'm seeing a bunch of people that look really down on their luck and having problems. And I'm thinking, to myself, wow, somehow I thought, boy, did they screw up, right? Without recognizing that my husband and I, who was with me, it's not her father, it's her stepfather, but we're both, we would put ourselves more in the workaholic category.
Right.
Which is, as I've heard, called coping privilege.
Right.
So I now can write and see that my workaholism, my put togetherness, my drivenness, my busyness is coping just like some cope with alcohol and drugs.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the same thing, but mine is privilege because it nets me money and status.
The same, people are addicted to drama. How many people do you know that?
Oh my gosh.
A friend who's like constantly addicted to the next person they're dating until that fizzles out, and then the drama of that, and then people that are addicted to being sick or ill, people who are Amazon,
the dopamine hits from shopping. We're having it, we're recording this around Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday and all that stuff, right? People get addicted, and of course gambling and sex, and another one, a huge one, is food.
Food.
What are we doing to fill that hole?
Yes. The woman who wrote Dopamine Nation, what a fascinating woman, and what fascinating research she's done. But what I found absolutely I mean, hold at my heart was she talked about addiction and she talked about AA. And she said, the truth is that the people who dedicate themselves to the process that is AA, she said, these people are the prophets of our time. Because there is no group in this society that is holding themselves so accountable on a day-to-day basis. What are my thoughts? Where are those thoughts coming from? How do those thoughts feed a negative narrative or create my view of the world? And then here I am responding to the negative world that I've created, and I'm creating this whole insular story that I created.
And it's all through my filters. I've set the whole thing up.
And you have to be so vulnerable, and you start to share with people like your dark. We don't do that. Most people, I'm not going to share, the ugly thing I thought this morning about my neighbor with you. Like, you'll judge me. But that's what gets people in AA excited, is that you're sharing that, because I have that too. And now because you were brave and shared it, I don't feel alone. And I feel inspired that I don't have to live in that space, that I can actually, by looking at it, I can actually now acknowledge it and shift it.
Right. And the key is owning it and then knowing I have the power to shift it, just like you did, going from being in the taking responsibility rather than just being a spectator for your life, which to me, that is in a lot of ways, that's what transformation is.
Well, let me tell you, it was a very slow, painful process.
So was mine. I understand. Because you want it to happen so quickly. And I know, a lot of times this happens with people who just enter into coaching with me. Mm-hmm. They get very excited about the possibilities, and they kind of, and I know I did this, you'll read this in my book. I kind of wanted that gold star right away. It's like, okay, now I know. So I should get the gold star and be declared self-aware. I should be declared done, which is just the same pattern.
I used to laugh with my clients that, I always knew the type A client when I worked in rehab, because they would come in, and they'd be, perfectly dressed, and they would have their notebook and their pen. They'd be like, all right, now just give me what I need to do.
Give me the steps. I'll do it.
I
want to know, I want to make an A.
Yes. Like it's 5 things that you just need to do, and then you're done. And then you graduate, and you're like, that is not how this is going to work. And eventually we look back on that and we laugh at that part of, like, that wanted the right answer so that they can just do it and get back to work.
Yeah. We're not recognizing that to me, that is the point of life. Like maybe I did set out to write a book or to, whatever my goal might be. But when you start recognizing that's just simply sort of the magnet that's pulling you along, but it's the mess of the daily work. And it's the mess that matters, not the stuff that goes right.
Right.
Like, when I was in the round pen with Bruce trying to learn to stop a horse and get back on the horse, and he kept saying, I don't want the horse to do the picture.
Right.
And I'd be looking at him like, you've got to be out of your flipping mind.
Right.
I mean, I'm not getting on a horse that doesn't do the picture. I need it to go right. And when I began to understand, and I'm in the middle of this now with a new dog, I've got a puppy. And, it's actually really makes me happy when she doesn't do the picture, because it's like, okay, now's the moment. How do I respond? How do I help her respond? So that we shape and create yet a stronger, more empowered mind. Because that's what I'm trying to create with my dog. I want an empowered dog that doesn't require force, fear, and intimidation to succeed. I want her to be making good choices.
And to that point, I also think that there is a view sometimes that people have that life is about avoiding pain and that
Yes.
taking the path of least resistance. And I will tell you that my experience has been that the biggest wins and shifts come out of being extremely uncomfortable, being possibly in a painful situation.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe that we grow and change through pain, whether that's just being uncomfortable because you're on stage
Yep.
in front of a bunch of people and it's your first time and you're terrified, that kind of pain, or
Yeah.
the pain of having to actually sit down and acknowledge things in your life that you have been doing every coping skill you know to never have to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And I think about people, I would ask you the question because of your extensive background in the corporate world, is that what percentage, if you were to just guess, what percentage of people are doing what they're doing because their family of origin and their community that they grew up in told them that was what success looked like?
Whoa, that's a high percentage. In the program that was the deepest of the programs I've taught, which was a self-awareness program, that we went really deep for a week. I mean, this was, for most people, they were like, I had no idea all that stuff was in there. And these were very successful corporate people. And the first thing that struck me as I taught that program was within the first year, I was able to realize somewhere north of 50%, probably closer to 75% of the people had some kind of abuse in their history.
Mm-hmm.
Either they had a parent or a sibling, but usually a parent that was a drug addict or alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
They had been physically abused. They had been sexually abused. They had, and it generally was people who were close to them. It was the uncle or the friend or the neighbor or whatever, but well north of 50% talked about that kind of thing happening.
Mm-hmm.
And they had not necessarily, most of the time, none of them almost had connected the dots that those kind of early experiences shaped what they made themselves learn to do. Like if I could count how many people said I was the first one in my family to go to college,
Mm-hmm.
or the ones who were feeling bad because they had reached a level of high position in an organization but felt stuck because they didn't have a college degree. They had earned it. And you know what I often had helped them change their way they looked at it was to see that those were the experiences that got them where they were.
Yes.
I had one client who was an immigrant who left a very terrible country under really bad circumstances. And his greatest fear was having to go back there.
Mm-hmm.
That he wanted never to have to experience that pain again.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, but you've already shown yourself that you can handle that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either treat it as something you never want to do again, or treat it as something that doesn't own you anymore.
Right, because you're bringing in the power of choice.
Yes, and it's mostly in just how you choose to see it.
Right.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I watched that day. I watched literally, it was like a black cloud lifted off of him.
Oh, I love that. I was just going to say, I've worked with quite a few people who work as agents, managers, tour promoters in, let's say, the music business. And the one thing that they all have in common is that they grew up in a family that had either addiction or mental health issues. And what it ended up being was that they grew up in chaos that made them try to cope by being the one that became the liaison, that became the one that knew how to calm mom or calm down
The
dad,
fixer, yeah.
fixer, right? They became also probably very codependent as well because of that.
Mhm.
But what I tell everybody is all of that stuff, it's not about looking at it as a negative, because everything has a positive and a negative pole to it, right?
Yes.
And it's all like a sliding scale of where it lands. That growing up like that is what made you so good at what you do now, because now you can deal with creative people and egos and all of the things that all the moving parts and the stress and
Yeah.
the firefighting aspect of putting out fires. And you can deal with all that because of how you were raised. So it gave you a talent, a skill. But now we have to look at the part of it, the side of it that may not be working for you, so that we
Yeah.
can minimize the impact of that side and maximize what you do have.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think happens, and I really discovered this about myself in this latest journey of getting back on the horse, was when we get those moments where we realize we're in, I call it the froth, but that feeling of something's off or I'm about to experience pain, I'm feeling pressure, is I'm making some kind of mistake that I need to fix. And the biggest problem with that I'm making a mistake thing is we forget the making part and put in place I am.
Yes.
So I think I am a mistake. And now I'm just suddenly treading water and flailing about trying to not be a mistake, as opposed to going, oh, what an interesting problem to solve. These three things are not coming together. That horse is not doing what I thought he was going to do. My dog is not doing what I thought she should do. I just said something to somebody, and all of a sudden I went from connected to disconnected. I lost them, and I don't know why. And instead, I lose them, and I'm like, oh, I'm the biggest mess. I'm not saying those exact words, but that feeling inside is, now I got to fix me. And it's like all this stuff comes up. And I've come to think of it, I call it the robot in my book, but I also think of it as an alien almost, because it's that old conditioning. And really, isn't that all you and I are doing with people, is helping them try to melt some of that away? And say, what happened to you shaped you, but it doesn't have to own you.
Right. Exactly. And the only way that the biggest shift you can make, I think the most important thing you can do, is to become curious about why you are the way you are, or that you think the way, shouldn't even say you are the way you are, why you behave in the way you behave, or why you think the way you do, because sometimes that's not even something we chose. It was our environment and our teachers or parents or whatever that gave us those voices in our head, or those
the committee.
I know, the panel, I call it the panel.
Or some people call it the board of directors. One woman, I had one client call it, all these damn people living rent free in my head.
Well, that's and that's what the cool thing about, I don't know if you've heard about parts work therapy.
I love
or internal family systems. It's
IFS.
It's the idea that even though we have all those voices, if we can start to identify where they came from, because the majority of them were created when you were a kid, and they were created to keep you safe. That was their number one goal. Maybe being seen in your family was not safe. So the part of you that wanted to come out and play there was a part of your brain that developed that said, shut up, sit down, be quiet, because that kept you safe. But if you don't ever stop and look at it and start to parse out what's going on in your head, right? As an adult, that could be a very negative thing. We don't need that shut up, sit down and be quiet voice anymore. That's actually working against us. But you don't push back against that with more pressure and go, oh, I hate that voice.
No, because it will double down. It
Right.
will own you. Like you have to actually integrate it.
What you
'Cause
resist persists.
It's, you know, the two parts in that place are really trying to do the same thing. The part that's trying to like rise up is also, it's trying to keep you safe, just like the part that's trying to like keep you down or feels like it's
Right.
trying to keep you down. Are you familiar with Connie Ray Andreas's book, Core Transformation? Have you read this one?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I love this book. It's called Reaching the Core Transformation, Reaching the Wellspring Within. And she actually described processes that people can do for themselves to take themselves through this kind of work, to see how, because, you know, a lot of times we even just use this language. We say, well, a part of me wants to go for it, and the other part of me is scared.
Yes.
Well, that's true, because you actually literally do have two parts of yourself.
Right. But most of us just go, I'm scared, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't acknowledge the other parts. But if you said, instead of saying I'm scared, say you said part of me is scared, but part of me is excited, and part of me is this, then it just takes a lot of the fangs out of those thoughts. Then you don't make them about who you are. It's just something that you're experiencing, but you're also experiencing other things as well.
And just how we frame it is so huge. You know, I remember hearing first about, there was a story about the distinction between nervous and excited. And it was a group of researchers were teaching, they were going to use karaoke as a way to put people under pressure and then see what happens if they just shape their nerves differently. And they had three groups. One group was told, because this is ambush karaoke, so very few people, unless you happen to have a great voice, are going to go, oh, yay, I get to sing in front of people. You know, normally they're going to be pretty excited about or upset about that or nervous or whatever. So they said, group one, your job, you're nervous. Your job is to make yourself try to feel calm. The second group is you're nervous, just feel the nerves, no other thing. Third group was you're feeling something, it's excitement. So shape it as excitement. Everything else was the same. And they had some way to measure how well they hit the notes and all that kind of good stuff. So guess which group did the worst?
The ones that were told to try to be calm.
That's by far, it was like a 56% of them or something like that did well. And of course, guess which group did the best? Excited. Because like 80-something% of those folks did well because they just took the feelings, whatever those feelings are. It's just a soup of, you know, heart pounding, flushed, you know, voice cracking, whatever. And they changed what it meant. And it changed how they performed. And as a, you know, I do tournament water skiing. I used to do tournament water skiing. I mean, I ski the course now, but I remember just changing that in a tournament changed my outcome, to say, oh, I'm feeling it. I'm excited.
Yeah.
It changes everything.
Are you familiar with Mel Robbins?
Yeah.
Yeah. She read the 5-second rule, and I love that book. And she talked about that in the book was, you know, just the idea of changing the story from I'm anxious to I'm excited.
Yeah.
When you're going into things, into new realms and stretching outside your comfort zone shifts everything.
Right. Because it puts your body in a problem solving mode as opposed to a fix it mode. You know, trying to fix nerves, that's the worst thing you can do. And I know it because I've tried it more than once.
Yes.
And, you know, the worst thing that my husband can say to me is, you're a coach, you should know how to be calm by now. It's like, oh,
you want to pull that knife out of my back, honey?
but you know, the point being is, like, his assumption, which is pretty common, is just because you've worked on yourself means you have the answers.
Like you're perfect now. You're fixed.
Like you've got it fixed. Exactly. And it's like, you know what, there are still some places where I don't have it all together. And I think our families are the most challenging places for that. But you know, the thing is, he's only voicing what I've said to myself. I should be better than this right now. Right. And that kind of self-talk is not useful. We think it is. we do it because we think it's going to, we beat ourselves up because we think it's going to somehow help things. And we would never do that to somebody else.
No.
So why do we think it would work with them? I mean, with us, if it wouldn't work with somebody else?
You know, this brings up for me the other day. There's something that has come into my orbit in which I'm exposed in some way to seeing horses not being treated in the best way, let's say. And that really activates the judgment in me.
Mm-hmm.
And here is, and I always feel like when this happens, that you can go to the, oh, I really don't, start to feel down about yourself. Like, why are you feeling this way? You're supposed to be better than this, right?
Right. That you're supposed to be better than this.
You're supposed to be better than this. Are you a hypocrite? Like, are you a big fraud? Because, you're talking to people about this, and then here you are, look at you struggling, the inner struggle. And I like to say to myself that, I am a work in progress. I am human. I will never lose my humanness. I will react to my surroundings. One of the sayings in addiction is that you can't help the first thought that comes to your mind. Like, maybe I want to drink, or but you can shape the thought that comes next. Yes.
That's right.
So if I'm out there and I'm feeling all of this, churning inside of judgment and anger and sadness, and I'm struggling to be kind in the way of, look, what I'm seeing is happening everywhere. It's, people are slowly evolving, but not everybody's caught on. So
yeah,
what do I think I am actually doing by standing over here and just creating this dervish of negative energy? And do you know what I mean? Like, that's not you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. And if this is coming up in you, then it's an opportunity for you to expand your empathy and compassion. And what can you do to help the situation instead of sitting over here judging it?
Well, that one of the biggest questions that it would always come up on the first night of the program, and it often comes up with clients when they first work with me, which is, okay, I'm curious. I want to know more about myself, but I've also shut myself down for a long time. So I've got a very thick set of armor here I've made as impenetrable as possible. So how do I find a way in? Where can I find those cracks to start seeing what's actually really in here? And that's what I have found for myself, is those moments when I can't get off my high horse and judge people, or I'm inexplicably angry, or I'm feeling victimized. Those are the moments where I can go, there we go. There's something in there for me to work on. What is it? Because it's never about the other person.
No.
It's always, early on, I had a coach that said, if you want to point the finger, remember 3 fingers are pointing back at you.
Yeah.
And actually, that was the first coach that taught me about taking personal responsibility and recognizing that I wasn't the victim of my life. And that's where it all starts, is to be able, I love that was one of your early turning points, which is taking responsibility for yourself. So I have to mention, by the way, we've got to let people know how we met, because the way we met was, it was actually, I guess it started on Warwick Schiller's podcast because you heard me on his podcast.
Yes.
And then you reached out to me on Instagram, and I don't know if I told you this when we saw each other in San Antonio, and we got to talk about San Antonio. But so you reached out to me and commented on the podcast I did with Warwick, and especially on, and we'll just have to have people go listen to the podcast about how I talked about what I had said to my daughter Jen when she was in addiction. And it was mainly around creating boundaries.
Mhm.
And you and I had I think it is the longest, maybe one of the richest back and forths on Instagram Messenger that I've ever had with somebody I don't know. You know,
Oh, really?
there
I thought you
so-
just, I was like, this lady's so cool. She's like, she spent so much time talking to me on Messenger. I wonder if she puts this much into everybody that reaches out to her.
Well, it depends on the person, you know, because sometimes it's not a real connection. Sometimes it's, you know, some guy going, "Hey, how you doing today?" You know, and
Yeah.
hoping that they dangle the hook and hope you'll answer back. But, you know, you had a genuine inquiry, and I was like, I am more than interested in helping. But what was funny is you were then later on Warwick's podcast, but
Mhm.
I didn't connect the dot that you were the Christine that had reached out to me on Instagram. And so we were in San Antonio, and we have got to talk about this event that we just were at within the last month. But you came up and said, I was the one on Instagram that reached out to you. And I was like, we talked about the earth shifting a lot there. And that was one of my earth shifting moments where I was like seeing things completely differently. I was like, oh, now it all makes sense. So how would you describe what we were at? It was called the Journey On Podcast Summit. So
Mhm.
Warwick Schiller has a podcast. For those of my audience who's listened, he's been on this podcast as well. In fact, he was on my podcast like 3 months maybe before he started his own.
Mm.
And he has just taken off a podcast that's a whole nother thing. It's like a whole different thing than I've ever seen. And he invited 20 odd number of his podcast guests from the last year to come to a summit in San Antonio. That's what we just came back from. It was 3 days. No horse. Even though he's known as a horse trader, there were no horses involved. We were in a hotel on the Riverwalk. But how would you describe that experience? And a lot of us are trying to figure out how to describe it. So I'd love to hear from you live. How would you describe it?
I laugh at this question because I have watched everyone get this question that was at the summit, and everyone gets this half smile and their eyes kind of glaze over, and they just say the same things of like incredible connection.
Mhm.
The energy was off the charts. It is something that I think is very challenging to describe something that was so visceral using language, because it really was something to be felt and experienced.
Mhm.
And it doesn't really line up in a way of, well, this person said this and that. But I guess the best thing to say is that my expectations, I thought, were high going into it. I
Mine
almost
too.
was like, maybe you need to bring your expectations down, because these things never really live up to what you're hoping for. And to say that it blew far past any expectation I could have created is the truth. And that everyone, you know, I said this before, that usually at this type of event, you know, you have the presenters who are, everyone's very reserved. There is this feeling of like, you're going up to someone that is on high, and you're
Yeah.
the little person, you know, one of the littles, asking them questions, trying not to take up too
Yeah.
much of their time,
Yep.
moving on. And there was none of that. There was no velvet rope. There was no feeling that there was a difference between the speakers and the attendees. It was, we were all there experiencing this together. And that the speakers, I love that the speakers brought what they knew, that what they had been doing in their life, but
Mhm.
they also all seemed to bring their sense of wonder and like things that they were working on. They wove in like the direction that they wanted to go and things that were
Mhm.
fascinating to them. And everyone had this real generosity of spirit of wanting to help each other and wanting to support each other, that I don't think I've ever been in a room of people that connected and supportive. And people would be like, you want to go to lunch? You want to go to dinner? Where are you going? Oh, I'm going here. And there was no negative feelings even about if you couldn't go with that person because you were already going here. It was like, cool, yeah, like all of that. It was, and the way it was set up in the jury was, we had the breakfast was served in that big room, and then you had the kind of kickback food at night. And even if you didn't eat the food, everyone gravitated there. So the cohesiveness of it never left. It wasn't like everyone went off in different directions once the last speaker spoke. So this felt, as much as the word community relays that sense of community, that this felt like a community was being formed. And the cool part is that, how big can it get? How can people find this in their life? Because once you experience it, you're like, this is a thing that I always wished for and never thought it would happen, but here we are.
That's exactly how I felt. And I remember scratching my head the first day, because being that I've spent a lot of my life in corporate events in hotels with funky carpet and the sort of, speaker after speaker, when I saw the first setup, it almost called up nightmares for me, because I thought, oh my God, people droning on and whatever. And, the word that has come up as you were talking is unguarded. People were unguarded. They weren't reserved. They were so back to the original quote that you said when we started talking a while back about comparison robbing us of joy.
The death of all joy.
It's the death of all joy. What I realized is, immediately the speakers were not comparing themselves to each other at all. They were actually really relishing hearing from each other, how they might be taking the same message but putting their own twist on it. And there was no competition at all among them, among other people. And I think that Warwick and Robin did a good job of setting up the conditions for everybody to be for each other. But that's what I experienced. Like you said, there was no velvet rope. The first morning, I saw a guy that had a t-shirt that said Team Quirky, and I talked to him about the Team Quirky and realized I'm sitting there with Rupert Isaacson, who's done this amazing movie and written these books. And we had one of the most profound conversations about all of the stuff that you and I've just been talking about. Is sort of, how do we get back to our true nature at breakfast? And I was like, I can't believe I'm getting to do this. It was incredible.
Oh, it was definitely lots of let me pinch myself moments.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You actually got put on the spot during the event. So I want to know how much of that was a pinch me moment, or what other kind of moment, because evidently you and I there were 3 podcast guests that were not included in the speakers. I think JP Dow, you and I, because of timing and so forth. And you had just been on the podcast, and I guess Robin or Warwick, or both of them, asked you to actually close everything out.
No pressure.
And you found out, no pressure while you were there. So what was that like?
Well, I think that you can imagine, after me telling my story of my early years, that that there's no way that I could be sitting in front of you right now if I wasn't somehow supported by whatever you want to call the universe, source, God, whatever that means for you. I would not be here. The magic in my life started not back then, but started in probably around 2017, 2016, when I was getting a very loud voice in my head constantly saying to me, you will not get the financial security and sense of purpose in your life that you crave until you stop being the backup singers or the wind beneath someone else's wings in your partnerships that were always toxic. It was way easier for me to believe that someone else could make something of their life than I could, even though I had this equal belief that there was things I was supposed to be doing at the same time. And when I finally put that away and invested in myself, the changes and what was created was so fast that even me sitting here with you is part of that momentum. It's still going.
Yeah.
And so what I realized is that if I'm willing to show up, do the work, and say yes, the universe will bring me to door after door after door. And I couldn't imagine what doors are coming, but the ones that show up when I'm like, I don't know what's next, here comes a door. And Robin said to me on Saturday, would you close out tomorrow? Which was Sunday. And
Wow.
I stood there and there was two equal thoughts. One is, how freaking cool and exciting that this person thinks that I can do this, and that, you know, the idea that I can do this. And the one that's, you know, was built in from childhood, which is, who do you think you are? When you are seen, you are not safe.
Right.
This is when everyone will figure out that you shouldn't be here. And both of them kind of short-circuited my brain. And I remember saying to her, can I have a little, have 30 minutes to think about it? And she said, sure. And then she said, I have somebody else I can ask too. And I went, fear of loss. Fear of loss. So I think maybe 15 minutes later, I was like, I'm in. Because the following thoughts of like the overwhelm, and then it was like, are you stupid? Like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
This is an
I
opportunity.
did commit. I actually committed to show up.
Yes. You're supposed to say yes. That is your mantra. You say yes. So I was like, better run back there before she asks somebody else and say yes. And I did.
Wow.
And then of course, the next thought is, what if you fail? What if you let all these people down? What if you ruin this whole thing? You know, you're the one that's going to be tying it all together. You're the last speaker. And I immediately said, okay, first of all, I have to stop thinking about the weight of this, because that's only going to mess me up, right? This came to me. I did, you know, it was given to me. So there's a reason why it was given to me. There's a cosmic reason it was given to me. Now, I don't know if that reason is because I'm going to do well, just get by, or fail miserably. I don't know why I'm being brought to this door. All I know is I'm going to go through it. And I will, whatever happens, I will take it as a learning opportunity and figure out what I'm supposed to get out of that outcome. And that took the pressure off of myself.
And I just have to stop and say, that is what it means to not be attached to outcomes. Right? We get so caught up in it has to finish a certain way. But you were like, I can't lose.
Right.
You just gave all three ways it could go, and I can't lose. So I'm going to say yes and walk through that door. Brilliant.
And then I went to my hotel room and started like brainstorming and writing
Of
and everything,
course,
whatever, you know,
of course.
prepare. I
And
got,
thinking, what am I going to say? And how do I,
yes.
how do I close this out? What is it going to take to pull it together? All of that. Yeah.
Yes. How do I honor the Schillers and what they put together? How do I honor all the speakers and the guests? And I was pretty fast realizing, this isn't really about me, but what is being asked is for this part of it to go through my filter, because that's the only thing I can do. I can only be myself and bring it through my filter and the way I see the world. And that's basically what I ended up doing. And did I was I nervous? I was really nervous. And I was, my inner critic, afterwards had a lot of notes, had a lot of notes because, of the things, mostly because I want to be able to clearly give a message. And if I felt like I wasn't as clear and didn't cover it all as much, that's the part that kind of, I go, darn, well, but at least it shows me maybe next time I know what to work on and how this feels and what to do.
Well, what you did was, as I recall, was great. A lot of it's become a blur for me, but I remember sitting there going, damn, look at her go. That's amazing.
Really?
She found out yesterday and she's up there. I remember you telling the story about how you came to have one of your horses and you were in the parking lot making that phone call to say, if I'm not mistaken, you ended up with the foal of a mare that was in trouble, or
I ended up with the mare.
the mare. That's right. The mare. Yeah. So, I have to, like you said something about this idea of walking through the door, and I have to read something that I often give in workshops and to my clients. It's a short little poem.
Okay.
Because I think you just showed in real life what this is. And a lot of times people see this poem and they think of it as a theory and don't realize this is how life works. So bear with me for a minute, but I'm going to read this because this is neat. It says, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would otherwise never have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it.
Do you want to hear something funny? My friend Donna that I told you about, that was my mentor and guardian angel. That poem she read to me.
No.
Back when I was 24.
I'm just getting all kinds of chills.
When you started reading that, I was like, oh, wow. Because she has this thing that she does called the Artist Conference Network. And she had invited me to that. And I was part of a group. And that's one of the poems they talk about. Now, who wrote that?
I don't know who wrote that poem. It was given to me by one of my early coaches years ago.
Okay.
And we called it the commitment poem at that time.
Yes.
And I've used it ever since because I found it to be true for myself.
Okay.
That moment of commitment and watching things move my way. And it's sort of like, it's like you're sitting on the edge of a river in a way, and all of a sudden everything you need starts going by you. And you realize all I have to do is reach out. It's there. Like everything I need is coming to me if I will just believe it.
Yeah.
But the belief is such a funny thing.
Believing is seeing.
Believing, and we don't realize how often, like, we have beliefs about belief, right? So I know as I was on my journey early on, I was raised in a pretty standard sort of like Methodist Christian family that had a lot of, you know, a lot of Bible verses attached to my life. And very much, like a cookie cutter, I call it my Leave It to Beaver family, like a cookie cutter way of being. And when I started on this path, I started struggling with things that didn't necessarily line up with, I'm going to put quotes around this, the belief system I had been taught. And I remember this was when I was working up in Tennessee. I remember leaving a session and heading out to my cabin that had no running water and no heat, no electricity, and thinking, am I going to go to hell because I'm thinking differently?
Wow.
And I had this moment, and it was as clear as anything has ever been in my life. Without hearing actual voices, I had a knowing that said, whatever it is, and your belief is not going to change it. And it gave me such peace, because I was worried that I was believing wrong and therefore somehow redefining God. And when I realized God is bigger than any belief I can have, and I'm using God because I don't have, God, providence, universe, we use all those things. Those are just our ways of trying to put words on something that's got no words.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, like you said this earlier about some of the experiences that we have, there are no words for it, but whatever it is, it is. And when I recognized that, it gave me a peace that said, okay, I think I'll just go with it then.
Exactly. No, and you remember that moment, and those are the moments, those voices that tell us the truth, right? And we recognize it. And I think that one of the biggest things that lead people to be disconnected from their own life is that they silence the voice that's inside, that's telling them, go this way, do this, try that. For what they think is security in the outer world. But then they lose trust in their own self.
Because there's also that other voice.
Yes.
So how do you help your clients find that true voice?
Well, first we have to start listening to it, with the idea that it's safe to listen to it. It doesn't mean you have to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's see, what is it saying to you? Because denying it is denying your true self. So, like when I said before, how many people do you think are working jobs or are in careers that someone else chose for them? It doesn't mean that they need to change careers if they recognize that. What they need to do is to choose the career for themselves instead of it staying the choice of other people.
Right.
Right? Because it shifts the whole thing, because now
Exactly.
You're in the ownership of it. It's your life. You're not living your life for anyone else. You can't.
I always say, are you running your life, or is your life running you? And it's just that switch, right? You can still be whatever, a doctor, a carpenter, a copywriter, whatever it might be.
Or maybe there's a part of you that went into something because of some aspect of that, but you could parlay that over a little bit to the left, and that difference that would make you so much more connected. Or maybe you want to do something completely different, and all of the fear-based thinking and the fear of and the idea that the world is full of lack, that you don't see how you could do it, because like you said, well, I don't have the degree for that. I don't have the, I don't know if these statistics are still right, because this came from a mentor back in the 90s, but he had statistics that said that if you did not go to college, you were 4 times as likely to become a millionaire than if you did go to college. And not that money is the end all be all, but
Yeah.
it's challenging the belief system, right?
Yeah.
It also said most highly successful people that are entrepreneurs declared bankruptcy at least 3 times before they hit big.
Mhm.
What does that tell you about failure?
Essential to growth.
But we hear that and we understand it from a intellectual side, but if we experience it, we have a complete meltdown. Like
Oh no, and then we run back into our corporate job, which, you know, in a lot of ways, all colleges are doing, and this is pretty controversial in some people's mind, but I don't think so. They're just producing factory workers. They're just factory workers on Wall Street or in banking or in consumer products or whatever. You're a factory worker. If you're working in that world, you're a factory worker. I don't care how much intellectual stimulation you get from it,
well, you know,
because there's a lot of rules.
I do love the entrepreneurial spirit, and not that people can't find great purpose in working as a part of something, as a lower, let's say a different piece of
Mhm.
a company, but I do love the entrepreneurial spirit. And I love, one of my mentors had said, you know, either you are building something for someone else or you're building something for yourself. And if you're building something for someone else, this is me, make sure that that's because that's in line with what you're building for yourself.
Right. And that's the best part. Is that's, to me, that's when we're dancing the tightrope, is when we are in balance with, this serves my purpose and it serves a greater purpose as well.
Yes.
And there are lots of people in the corporate world, and I don't want to have this be misheard at all, that are in that space. But a lot, there's a huge lack of awareness as well that, you know, that sometimes you're just on the treadmill. You're just, or on the hamster wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the people I want to wake up and say, hey, there's more to this. You don't have to change jobs, but you can change the way you are in this job.
Yep.
And the way you
And
approach it.
sometimes it's not even about the job. Sometimes the job, you're perfectly satisfied, but there's things outside of the job, maybe with, you know, doing community theater or starting a charity, or, you know, taking kids on field trips. I don't know, as much as your imagination could do. Maybe that's what's missing. Is
pick up the guitar again. I've had a client do that, you know. Doesn't mean you have to go tour.
right. But maybe one day you will, and you'll until you pick it up.
Exactly. You know, who knows, because you're following something that's deeper.
Yes.
So I always like to end the podcast with just asking this question, which is, if there was anything that you could just have the listeners know, that you just know would be important for people to carry with them, either for today or with their life. You know, it could be a mantra, it could be, you know, just something you've learned along the way. What would you want my listeners to remember?
I think, you know, Jane Pike just recently talked about this too, is that we tend to look at, okay, there's a great, I have two quotes. One of them is, people laugh at those who dig for gold, yet admire those that have it.
Oh, that's good.
And the idea is, we tend to also look at people who we feel are living the life that we want to live, and we think that they have it all figured out, that they're over there completely 100% themselves, and knowing all this around them is staying forever, and that they've got it all figured out. And it's just not the case.
Not one of them.
So I love the quote from Kyle Cease, where he says, the reason that you don't start, the reason that you don't show up is because you can measure what you could lose, but you can't see what you could gain.
Mm.
And I think as a coach, people, if someone says, it's $10,000 to work with me for a month, right? So say someone says that. The first thing a person does is go, I'm going to lose $10,000. And the fear and the thoughts, and am I stupid? Am I being had? Is this going to be a big bunch of nothing? And I spent 10 grand on it. But the whole point is that you're investing in yourself so that, if you're just looking at it from a money standpoint, you could make 10 times that in the next year based on what you did in that 1 month, right? So, but we're so focused on what we could lose. But what you don't understand is that whether it's a coach that's 10,000 or 2,000 or whatever, or 50,000, you have just made a declaration to the world that you are playing in the game and that you are stepping up, and the world greets you. That has been my experience, that when I could see nothing on the horizon and had no clue how anything would happen, I would start from where I was. And sure enough, the road would rise to meet me. And I could have never made that happen. It happened because I started the momentum and the energy of saying that I'm in the game, I'm here, I'm going to take chances, I'm going to actually do work. Like it's not something you can do sitting on the couch. You have to have some skin in the game.
Yeah.
And then, right? Whether it doesn't even have to be money. Maybe you change jobs and that's the big, but you have to have skin in the game and you have to be doing the work and open at the same time.
I'm glad you're saying this right at this very moment, because I'm leaving on Wednesday. I'm coming out to California to the Equus Film Festival, arts and crafts thing, and the end of the Mustang Discovery ride and so forth. And I just don't like getting on airplanes. So I was like, but when they offered the chance for me to come out and show up, if you will, and talk about, Bruce and I are going to do demonstrations every day of the festival. At first I was like, kind of like you were talking about, no, why would we do that? I don't even know what we're going to do. And then I said, wait a minute, this is the coolest thing ever. I have no idea what we're going to do, but I'm going to go show up. And I kind of needed to hear that right now, because it's juxtaposed with having to get on an airplane to go across the country. And
Right.
I'm not fond of airplane flying these days. So you've just reinvigorated my excitement for coming out your way to California in a couple of days.
No, that I love that. I love that. And I know that there's fears, there's phobias, there's different things, but I will say that when I'm faced with fears like that, I tend to just go bigger picture and go, well, if either I'm supposed to not be here anymore, I'm supposed to keep going. And there's a bigger hand in that than me. So why be afraid of the airline flight? Because
that's just a small piece.
Yeah.
It is a bit of an inconvenience, but it's really not even that bad. And you know what? I'm back to writing again, and I do a lot of good writing on airplanes. A 4-hour flight is actually a luxury, because I can just pull up the computer, put on the headset, and go to town.
And go.
So I'm going to make the most of it. Well, so
speaking of writing, you gave me your book, Dancing the Tightrope, at the summit.
I did.
And I read half of it in 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
Is so good. I love it. I love, it comes down to that, being vulnerable, and you're so vulnerable and you're so honest, and you share thoughts that most people wouldn't share. And it helps for us, the reader, to identify with you and to cheer you on because we can see ourselves in you.
Thank you.
And and even reading about the stuff you did with Bruce, I feel frustrated for you. I can feel
Good.
because it's like and you can sit in both, like, I know what he's trying to do, but at the same time I'd be like, why isn't this,
Yeah.
why aren't you helping me, or why don't I know the answer?
Yeah.
So I'm halfway through, so I will finish, but it's a wonderful book.
So just that feedback is so helpful, because that's exactly what I was hoping people would experience. And, you know, a lot of people that have read the book to now, because it hasn't been out that long, know me and sort of had heard the stories firsthand from me. So the fact that you're getting that straight from the book and you got that tells me it came through on the page, which is always a writer's question. Is what I'm trying to say coming through on the page?
Exactly.
So that's fantastic. Well, I'm so grateful for the time that you've given on this podcast today. What a delightful conversation. And I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. Tell me, or tell everybody, how to find you in case they want to follow you, you know, possibly work with you. How do they get in touch with you?
My website is onthepathcoaching.net.
Okay.
I am on Instagram as Raven Sun Ranch, and also I just changed my handle. I think it's
You're like, who am I?
on the path _ in the now. I'm pretty sure that's it, but you can look up Christine Dickson.
We'll find it and put it in the show notes as well. We'll make sure.
What's funny is that my brain was so melted by the end of the summit that people were asking me for my email address, and I was giving them my website, and not because my brain wasn't even working, but my email address is on the path, C as in cat, H as in Harold, T as in Tom, @gmail.com. So it's on the path, CHT@gmail.com. There
you go. So people can find you, and hopefully your email doesn't get too overly inundated. But yes, this has been an incredible delight. So thank you so much for joining me here. And everybody, I will talk to you on the next podcast. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Let's see. Stop recording. There we go.